Hey everyone, in this video we're going to come back to the Hercules story from Ritchie's Fabulae Faciles, and specifically we're going to look at part 22, which is called The Girdle is Refused. Now, you might remember at this point what we're really talking about is the girdle of Hippolyta, which is the ninth labor of Hercules. So we saw in the previous video that Hercules has been tasked with finding this girdle. It's really like a war belt that the queen of the Amazons, Hippolyta, wears. So Hercules has gathered up his army and he's preparing to go and fight the Amazons and get this belt back for King Eurystheus' daughter, right? That's what he has to do. So remember, whenever you see these stories, the first thing you want to do is kind of make a vocab list for yourself. You can find them in different commentaries. If you need one, I have one I can always send you. But you want to make sure that you have the vocab as best as you can under control. Then you want to look up any grammar. So the method I always tell you should use is read and reread. So read through the story once, write down any vocab, grammar problems you run into, and then look all these things up. So if you have words you don't know, look them up. If you run into grammar where you're like, I don't understand what's happening here, look it up so that you can feel really comfortable with it. And then when you read the story a second time or a third time, it'll make a lot more sense because hopefully these problems you're running into, you're kind of solving as you go. But it really starts with vocab. It's very difficult to read and understand what's going on if you don't know what the words mean. And then you want to fill in the grammar. We're getting into more subjunctive, right? With Hercules, we've been seeing that a lot. That's really what you what you keep running into here. And the other thing I'd say is make sure that you're reading this story out loud. So try to find someone from class, a classmate, anyone that you can find, where you can read this to them and have them read it back to you, right? That speaking, that listening, those are skills you really want to use and parts of your brain you really want to use so that you can understand the Latin. It becomes so much easier when you do that instead of just translating in your head. But whenever you hit that point where you feel comfortable, you want to dive in. And as long as your translation is matching kind of with what I'm saying here, not that mine's perfect, you can feel comfortable that you're on the right track. So let's dive in. The story starts like this. You have his viris, Hercules persuasit, postquam causam itineris exposuit, ut secum iter facerent. So you have his viris, that's dative, and it's because you're really starting with persuasit. So Hercules persuaded, it's perfect tense. Now the verb persuade usually goes with a dative, right? It governs the dative, and this is an indirect command, okay? So he's persuaded them of something. So you're really saying Hercules persuaded these men. Remember, these are the men that he had brought in, the ones who were kind of skilled in war, the warriors, and he's getting ready to go on his journey. So he persuaded them, and then you have after, kind of the side note, after exposuit, after he explained the causam itineris, the cause of the journey, or the reason for the journey, you might say. So he persuaded them, and here's your ut clause, right? Because you have this purpose happening here, right? What did he persuade them of? Well, he persuaded them that they might travel, you could say, or iter facere, make a journey with him, secum, right? It's giving the purpose. You have the imperfect subjunctive there. So if you put it together, you're just saying that he persuaded these men after he explained the cause of the journey, so that they might journey with him or make a journey with him. Okay, or you could say he persuaded them to make a journey with him. Either way, you're getting at the right idea. Then it continues, and you have tum cum eis quibus persuaserat, persuaserat navem conscendit, et cum ventus idoneus esset post paucos dies ad ostium fluminis thermodontis apule. So you're saying then, and then you have a cum here, right? So with is really what's going on here. With these men, you might say eis. And it's these men whom, the quibus there is really whom. So it's with these men whom he had persuaded, persuaserat there is pluperfect tense, right? So with these men whom he had persuaded, conscendit navem, he, meaning Hercules, he climbed aboard the navem, the ship. And then you have cum here is really meaning when, right? So this cum clause is going with the subjunctive. You can see esset, right? There's imperfect subjunctive. So it's not saying with, but when, right? That temporal cum clause. So you're saying when the ventus, the wind, was suitable, idoneus, right? And that's why you have esset there, the imperfect subjunctive. You can translate it as if it's indicative. You'll get to the right idea. So when the wind was suitable, or you might even say when there was a suitable wind, after a few days, post paucos dies, he apulet, he kind of landed, you might say, came ashore. It's got the sense of like driving towards something, but in this sense, you can say like he came ashore. He drove his ship to, is kind of one way to say it. He came ashore at the ostium, at the mouth of the fluminis thermodontis, of the Thermodon River. So this, I think, is the modern Terme, if I'm saying that right, river in Turkey. But the Thermodon is this, the ancient Greek name for a real river, right? So that's where he shows up. He comes to the river, which is the land where the Amazons are, right? So he sails over to them. Then you have postquam in fines Amazonum venit, nuntium ad Hippolytum misit, qui causam veniendi docere et Balteam poscaret. So you're saying, after he came, venit, he came into the fines Amazonum, into the borders or the lands, you might say, of the Amazons, right? So he reaches their lands. He misit, he sent out a nuntium, a messenger, ad Hippolytum, to Hippolyta, right? So he sends a messenger to her, the queen, and it's a messenger who, qui, right now here, we have a purpose clause using the relative pronoun. So you've got what we call a relative clause of purpose. It's going to use a subjunctive, which is why you can see doceret, or doceret rather, and poscaret, right? Those are both imperfect subjunctives. So you're saying the messenger who would, you could almost say, who would doceret, who would tell. It doesn't really mean teach, it probably means more tell, who would tell the causam, the cause. Veniendi here is a genitive gerund, right? So you can say it the cause of coming, right? So it's the verb venire, to come, but you're using it as a noun, right? The arrival, you might say. So maybe you could translate this as the cause of the arrival. But again, the nd is setting this off as being a gerund. The genitive gerund is a very common one. It's so the reason for their arrival is kind of what it's saying. So again, the messenger who would tell the cause of the arrival, right, or the coming, meaning why everyone's here, right, why Herc is here, and also poscaret, he would demand the Balteum, the belt, right, the war belt, the girdle, sometimes they call it. So that's the purpose of what the messenger is doing. His purpose is to tell why they're here and to say hand over the girdle, right? So Hercules is asking for it before fighting, okay? Then you have ipsa Hippolyte, Balteum tradere volebat, quod de Hercules virtute famem acceperat, or acceperat rather, reliquae tamen Amazones e persuaserunt ut negaret. So it's saying Hippolyta herself, right? Ipsa is the intensifier, herself. So the queen herself, volebat tradere. So the queen wanted volebat to hand over the belt, Balteum tradere. It's just a complementary infinitive. So Hippolyta actually wanted to give it up and say it's fine. Why did she do this? Because acceperat, right? She had received famam, the report or the rumor, you might say. She had received rumor of day, right, concerning the virtute Hercules, the virtue of Hercules. So she knows who he is. Rumor has reached her and she's a little afraid, like, I don't want to fight this guy. I've heard who Hercules is, right? So her instinct is to just give the belt. However, tamen, the reliquae Amazones, the other Amazons, or the rest of the Amazons, you might say, persuaserunt, they persuaded her. Remember, persuade goes with a dative. That's why you have a there. That's the her part. So they persuaded, perfect tense, her, and it's an indirect command. The persuasion makes an indirect command. So you have the ut there. You could say they persuaded her so that she might refuse, or you could just translate it as an infinitive and say they persuaded her to refuse, right? Either way it works, but it's the indirect command. The other Amazons are like, no, you can't do this, right? Don't give in. Then it continues. You have at Hercules, cum haec nuntiata essent, belli fortunam temptare constituit. So here we're going to see Herc, kind of goes back to his nature. He tried diplomacy, and now he's like, not so much, right? So you have, but Hercules, when these things, right, haec, it's neuter plural substantive. So when these things, nuntiata essent is pluperfect subjunctive. So you have a fourth principal part, nuntiata, it's neuter plural, describing haec. And then you have the form of the verb to be, right? It's imperfect. So when you have imperfect of esse going with the fourth principal part, you're doing pluperfect passive, right? But here it's subjunctive because you have the cum clause. So that's why you're seeing essent. So you can translate it as if it's indicative. It's not really going to matter. But the reason it's subjunctive is because you have cum there. So you're saying when these things had been announced, right? Almost meaning when he heard these things, Hercules decided, constituit, to temptare, to try. It's a complementary infinitive. He decided to try the fortunam belli, the fortune of war. So in other words, he's like, I might as well take my chances with fighting, right? Which is kind of his nature, right? He's not so much the diplomat as the warrior. So he decided to try the fortune of war. So he declares war on them. He's like, we're not going to bother with diplomacy anymore. Okay, then you have proximo igitur die cum copias eduxissent, locum idoneum delegit, et hostes ad pugnam evocavit. So it's talking about Hercules. On the following day, it's the ablative of time, right? Proximo die. So on the following day, therefore, eduxissent, right? He, and this is cum clause, right? And you have the pluperfect subjunctive, eduxiset, right? The iset gives it away as being pluperfect, right? In subjunctive, rather. So it's saying on the following day, when he had drawn up his kopias, his troops, right? So when he had done this, delegate, he chose a locum idoneum, a suitable place, a suitable location, and evocavit, he called out, meaning he sort of challenged the hostes, the enemy, ad pugnam, to battle. So he called the enemy to battle. It's saying, come on, Amazons, like, come fight, right? Come fight, you cowards, is what he's doing. But he's being strategic here. So you're seeing why Hercules is a good leader and a good warrior. He's not just charging at him. He picked a place that was good for his troops, right? The locum idoneum. So he draws up his battle line and he calls out the Amazons. Then you end with this line. You have Amazones, quoque copias suas, ex castris eduxerunt, et non magno intervallo ab Hercule aciem instruxerunt. So the Amazons also, right, the Amazons also eduxerunt, they also drew out, or led out, you might say, copias suas, their own troops, ex castris, from their camp. Right, so they also lead out their army, right, their troops, and they instruxerunt, they drew up, you might say, they drew up is probably the best way to do it. Their aciem. Aciem means a battle line, right? So they take the troops and they draw up their battle line. So their formation. Where did they do this? Non magno intervallo ab Hercule. Not very far, right? Or you might even say not a great interval. Magno intervallo. So not a great distance or interval from Hercules ab Hercule. Right, there's your ablative with ab, the separation. So they line up pretty close to Hercules, and now we're going to have a battle, right? So you're going to see in the next chapter, they're going to have to fight it out. So hopefully this made sense. Again, like I always tell you, do the read and reread. The more you read through it, the better off you're going to be, right, in practicing it. But you're seeing more and more subjunctive, right? We mixed in a gerund there. So we're getting a little more complicated in the Latin, but we've done this for a few chapters. So hopefully it's making sense and you're not too thrown off by that. But at the end of the day, we have, the next labor. Now Herc is going to have to fight them. You're seeing more about his character and who the Amazons are, right? They're willing to fight as well, which is kind of cool about them. So like I tell you, you should probably look this up, the culture and the myth behind it. It's really interesting. But in terms of the Latin, if you have any questions at all, just let me know. Or if there's anything in my translation where you're not sure how I did it, just put it in the comments below. I'm happy to help you. But otherwise, keep practicing, keep reading it, and you should be fine and get better as you go. Good luck.